G'day, welcome back to Riff's Garage. Today we're going to be having a look at the turbo that came off the Hilux. There we go, this guy. So we'll be pulling it apart and I'll show you how to reassemble it. We'll be having a look at why this one failed and seeing if it's worth rebuilding. Alright, so pretty simple. Everything on this turbo is going to be a 12mm nut or bolt, or it'll be a circlip. There's a large circlip in there holding the two parts together, and there's a small, I guess it'd be a C-clip here holding the plunger body to the wastegate. So let's get to pulling it apart. Now the problem with this one was that it had oil that was being blown back up. There's the oil drain and the oil feed. The small hole's the oil feed and the big hole's the oil drain. Now they're water cooled. You got water inlet on one side, and normally it's blocked off on the other side, but you can have a flow through type. That's what I've done with the Hilux. Now the issue was that on the oil side of things, I wasn't getting the oil draining back into the block because I had too much blow-by pressure. And so I've since fitted a restrictor. I put a new turbo on, and I'm going to rebuild the engine because I believe I've got a broken ring, but we'll figure that out down the track. So for this one, I noticed that with the oil pressure, with the blow-by pressure being so high, oil wasn't draining out of it. Now, normally that's not too much of an issue because it is an issue, but what would happen is the oil pressure would build and it can leak past the seals. And I'll show you the oil seals when we pull it apart. And normally it would get into maybe the exhaust housing and it'll get burnt out the exhaust back here. But what was happening was it was actually coming out of the flanges. Oil was actually leaking out of all the flanges on this turbo, so the pressure was really immense. It was no good. But anyway, what we'll do is, first thing you want to check is the shaft. Now I can move that shaft slightly. Don't know if the camera's picking that up, but if I pull it down, there's a bit of shaft play there, and that's not good. Have a look at the other side, and there's probably a little less on that side, so I think that there might be some wear on this side of it. The other thing you want to do is see if it spins freely, and that's spinning quite well. So that's good. Now let's see about pulling it apart. You can test these. You check if the spring's any good. So you pull it out and it should pull back, and you want to see if there's a vacuum there. So you could put a vacuum gauge on it, or you could just stick your mouth on it and have a suck, see what's going on. You want to make sure that port's not blocked off, because otherwise the inside of this canister will pressurize. But this one's fine, the spring works well, and if I were to suck on that, yep, it's fine. Alright, so the next thing to do is we're going to split the cases. So there's a clamp here. These two bodies are pinned together, so they've actually got a pin that locks them so you can't clock it. So what you want to do is try and knock on that with a dead blow mallet, because you don't want to damage it. But there's a good chance that they're going to be extremely tight, so you might have to put it in a vise. If that's the case, we'll go over to the vise. What you don't want to do is belt on the aluminium housing. Be very careful of that. So what we might actually do to remove the aluminium housing, just so we don't damage it, is get rid of this big circlip here, and then that'll let us take the housing off. And then the only thing we have to watch out for is we don't damage the turbine blades. The way these snap rings work is they've got a chamfered edge that goes down like that, and it tucks under the aluminium housing. So by sticking something under it and prodding it up, you can get access to it. Now it's not the best way, because there's the potential of damaging the aluminium housing. But you know, if you're stuck like I am, been struggling for ages with a set of needle nose pliers, then that might be your only option. Alright, there we go. Now we'll just gently tap this off. Like so. We'll have a look at the inside of the turbine housing. Sorry, the compressor housing. So you can see that's got a fair bit of wear. There shouldn't be any wear there at all. These blades should not be making contact with that one bit. So what that tells me is that either the bearings or the shaft itself has some sort of problem with it. Maybe you can see that. You see that movement? I can definitely feel it. There's maybe half a mil of movement, maybe a little less, just right at the edge there. Now I don't know if you can see it, but there's a flat there. Do you see the flat? Now that would be to balance it. So this side's been balanced by grinding away on that flat, and this side here has been balanced by grinding that notch into it. So when you take these apart, it's a good idea to mark them so that their position is the same on the line. Now it looks like that one's actually been punched before. It's got a tiny punch mark in there, and that lines up with a punch mark on the top there, so I don't have to worry about that. And the other side looks like it hasn't been touched. There's no punch mark, but what I might do is just put one right in the center of that flat, but on the actual turbines, so that I know which way it goes together if this comes apart. And there we go. I've put a little mark right down there in the middle of the flat. Wastegate works fine, no movement there. Alright, so that there is the core. And as you can see, the bearings spin okay, but it's just got too much shaft play. And aside from that, it's all in pretty good condition. And this here, okay, there's another clue. That there is a bit loose, and I've got sort of silvery grease. Although that's probably the anti-seize in there, so that's fine. I was worried that it would be due to metal wear, metal particles. And this is the pin I was talking about earlier that clocks it into the housing. So there's your pin, and that way it stops you from being able to rotate these. So this section here is pretty much pulled apart. There is a bushing in there that you can replace. I haven't seen a kit for it, and this is all riveted together, but if you're really desperate you could, I guess you could break it apart and rebush that, although there should only be gases coming out this side of it. There shouldn't be any oil, which is one of the reasons this one was failing, is because it was full of oil on this side. So there's your core, and you often see these on eBay. People sell cores, so you can just chuck one straight into your housing. That might be the way I go for this. I'm not sure. We'll see. So I'm going to go back to the vise. I'll pop that end into the vise, and I'll get some multi-grips on that, and we'll pull it apart, because I don't have the right tools to take that apart. But if you're careful, you shouldn't damage it. So I've got it mounted in the vise. I've got the flat up against the soft jaws, so it shouldn't rotate, and I'll get some vice grips up on this side and see if I can crack that loose. Now there are different kits available to rebuild these, but one thing to note is that some of them come with new screws, new nuts, and others don't, and you're probably better getting a nut just in case you damage it using the vice grips if you don't have the right tool. And one thing to remember as well is that it's a reverse thread, so you're actually turning it clockwise to pull it off, and that's because of the direction it spins in. So now what we'll do is we'll try and pull that impeller off. There you go, just pops right off. That's alright, that's not showing signs of wear, and you can see that it's been balanced. So aside from the fact that it's been rubbing on the inside of the housing there, it's not too bad, but I wouldn't want to reuse it because of that. Now the kits that you get, they're going to come with new O-rings. So you'll get a new O-ring here. You'll get a new one of those. Some of them come with a new clip, C-clip. Others don't. So just, I guess it depends on how much you're willing to pay. You don't normally need to replace that. So there's another circlip in here. There we go. And there'll be some splash shields. Alright, so your kit probably won't come with that. That's a shield that stops any exhaust gases, sort of heat shield that stops the exhaust gases from going into the compressor side of things. And this here, that right there, is our seal. That's the seal there, and it's got a split in it. I'll just try and rotate it so you can see. So you see that split, and when it's pushed into the turbine housing, it actually closes that gap. So it's a bit like a piston ring, exactly like a piston ring, and that's the seal. There's going to be another one on the other side, and so to continue pulling this apart, what you can do next is pull out. See that bronze bushing in there? So this doesn't have ball bearings or roller bearings or anything like that. It's got bushings. So you just give that a bit of a tap, and the bushings will come out. That's what they look like. And these are in very good condition. So I think that what might have happened with this turbo is it's had a kit put through it, and the problem was that there was just too much wear in either the housing or on the shaft. So it wasn't ever gonna work very well anyway. So continuing on, you've got a spacer. So that's your spacer between the two bushes. So as I'm going, I'll just reassemble it, that way we know what order things go in. So these are symmetrical, so it doesn't matter which way they go. Then we've got another bushing under there. And that doesn't want to come out that way, must go out the other way. So what I'll do is I'll tap this housing out with something soft, because I don't want to damage the bronze bushing. There we go. I've just got a wooden dowel. We'll use that as a drift. Tap that. And there we go. Alright, so now the sort of, I guess you'd call it the core housing, or the core is completely bare. There's nothing in there anymore. And you can see that there's a roll pin pressed in there to locate something. And there we are. So what came out? That was on the outside. That looks like some sort of shield, and it rotates around that center part. An oil splash shield goes next. Then something looks like this locates this brass piece, and it looks like this brass piece allows transfer of oil. So something like that. And of course the other bushing. Now, aside from the seals leaking oil, the other major problem with this turbo, as we sort of figured out, was it's wearing on the inside of this housing, which it really shouldn't be doing. These blades shouldn't be coming anywhere near that housing. The clearance should be sort of spot on and shouldn't let them touch it. And you can see here on the edge of the blades, those like lines, that's where it's been wearing. So this is pretty much junk now. But just to make sure and see what actually was causing it, these are relatively new bushes, but I don't know if the camera's picking that up, but it's got a fair bit of slop in there, and that's enough when this thing's spinning, you know, at like tens of thousands of revolutions per minute, to cause big problems. A fair bit of slop in that, so that's the problem. Worn shaft, worn housing, worn blades, and worn seals. So that is the completed assembly. Now, one thing that I find surprising is there's only one oil seal, one of these piston seals on this side, and I would have expected one on both sides. But I suppose what's happening is the oil pressure is being redirected by this plate, maybe. Maybe that's what's happening. That's why there's only one shaft seal. Unless the other seal is actually in here. It could be. Ah, there you go. Alright, so you take this cover off, and inside there we've got the other seal. So you can see it there as I'm squeezing it tight. That's closing the seal. Alright, that makes a lot more sense. So assembly would be the reversal. And when you do buy the kits, I know this from experience, you get another one of these nuts to put on top. Now these nuts aren't balanced, and you don't have to worry too much about destroying them because the good kits come with a replacement. So just make sure before you pull your turbo apart that you've got one of those to replace it with. But it's a right-hand thread, and you can just get some vice grips on it if you don't have the right tool. There you go. So we might reassemble this. So I've been struggling with this circlip for a little while, and I realised that an easier way to do it is to install it without the shaft in there. So I've got the what's that? That's the turbine side, the exhaust side of it out with the exhaust bushing, and everything else is in there. There's the spacer. This heat shield is off, but aside from that, everything else is in there. And this cap here has to be recessed far enough down that you can slip the circlip into that groove there. So we'll give that a go now. And this thing's got a chamfered side and a flat side, and you want the flat side to face up so that the chamfer digs in underneath the lip. So I don't know if you saw that, but I just dropped the nut that goes on this end down behind my bench, and I'm not moving my bench to get that out. It can stay there forever. This is it's a used turbo. I just pulled it apart for the purposes of showing you how to take one apart and diagnose what's wrong with it, put it back together again. But that nut can stay there. So I'll keep going on with the reassembly. So once you've got it to this point, and you've got your your compressor side tightened up, there is a torque spec for it, and it should come with your kit. So your next step is to get the exhaust housing, and now once you line the pin up on these two housings, what I find works well to get them together is you can put it in a you could certainly use a press if you wanted. Just make sure that you press down evenly on both sides, because otherwise it'll go in sort of askew. But what I find works best for me is I just pop it on the ground like that, or on a bench. I get a big socket or a tube over here so that there's plenty of clearance and you don't touch the blades. And then I just get a dead blow and give it a bunch of whacks, and one or two normally does it. As long as it's perfectly lined up, it'll go straight in. Then once it's in, you get your two clamp halves, and And there you have it. One fully disassembled and reassembled CT20 turbo. The only thing we need to worry about, and that's if we were to ever use it again, would be that nut there. But like I said, it's gone down the back and I'm not getting it. There you go. That is how you pull one apart, you inspect it, and you put it back together. So good luck with your project. Thanks for watching.